Welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems, the ones you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve well rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. Before we get on with the show, I'd like to just ask for a couple of minutes of your time. I like to point out every week how this show is brought to you principally by the supporters on Patreon. I'm hearing from people all the time how valuable they find the show, and those supporters who have the means to help fund it, to keep it going and help me reach new audiences are very much appreciated. You really don't have to do it. The show is free to thousands of people every week, but those of you who can are really so instrumental in helping me to keep this show going, and to keep it available for those who need it just as much as you, but cannot afford to help keep it going. So if you're somebody who is making use of Sleepy Time Tales regularly to help you to deal with sleeplessness, and you have the urge to support the show, and most importantly, of course, if you can afford it and have the means, please take a look at patreon.com/sleepytimetales, or go from the link in the show notes or to the website to take a look. As you listen to this, it's either immediately after or almost month end. And a new month is a good time for you to sign up, especially if you're doing so at the $5 level, because you gain instant access to special edits of the shows and currently 99 and counting bonus catnap minisodes. But if you're more inclined to make a once-off contribution, because after all a monthly commitment can seem a bit much, then check out buymeacoffee.com/sleepytimetales, also linked in the show notes. And there you can help out the show without even needing to sign up for the service. But of course, while money, of course, is handy, it's how I pay for the services that I use and whatnot. It's also, there's another really important way you can help the show, and that costs you nothing. That's simply to spread the word. If there is someone in your life who you think will benefit from listening to Sleepy Time Tales, just let them know. If you recommend the show on social media, make sure to tag me in so that I know and I can thank you. That's at Sleepy Time Tales on both Instagram and Twitter. Last but not least, of course, I've got to shout out the music, which is Sweet Night and Friends by Kumiku. Their music is available on their website at loyaltyfreakmusic.com. I've linked their website in the show notes, as they've got some very cool stuff that they release under various names that I recommend checking out. Thank you for taking the time, and let's get back to the show. So what exactly is Sleepy Time Tales? What is it for? It is a strange idea after all, a podcast that you're supposed to fall asleep to. But lack of sleep is a health crisis in the 21st century, and this is a podcast that is intended to help those that it can to get a restful night. Do you find yourself lying awake at night, with your mind spinning and emotions in turmoil with the anxieties of 21st century life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find yourself not quite able to doze back off at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to help you into a restful night. Sleepy Time Tales is intended to be used as a distraction to what keeps you awake at night, or sometimes background noise, or maybe even company. That's why I make the episodes quite long, so that I'm here for you without any pressure of the end coming. As far as I know, there are a couple of different ways to engage with the show. For me, what I need when I'm struggling to sleep is I need something to focus on. A story or an event that lets me keep my mind on a specific point to stop it from spinning out into stress and anxieties. To focus just enough not to resist the embrace of sleep when it comes for you. But for some people, it might be something a bit different. Some kind of background noise might be necessary. Some people like the sound of the rain or sound of the ocean or wind and trees Or maybe someone just like some boring dude droning on in the background. But whatever really matters, however you engage with the show, it's very important that you don't try to force the sleep. Just keep a light sort of mental grip on the thread of the story and allow the need for sleep to come for you. Now, obviously, I'm hoping that you're asleep before I get to the end of the story, but it's important that you don't feel pressurized. This may not work on the first night. In fact, odds are it probably won't. I suggest giving it a good solid 3 nights to see if you can get into the rhythm of it or the sense of it, or get you some accent and the sound of my voice and the strangeness of the idea of just listening to some dude who's going to be droning on while you're sleeping. Or maybe you have a slightly different problem. Maybe your problem isn't so much going to sleep as waking up in the middle of the night. This one's actually the one I've developed fairly recently. I wake up at 3 a.m. What I do is the shows that I listen to, I leave them running all night. I download a bunch of episodes and playlist them, and then I start with the latest one and I let it go. And when I wake up, find myself staring at the ceiling and my earbuds have fallen out. I just pop them back in and whoop, there I go, straight back to sleep again. Sometimes even I wake up a little bit before my alarm, 30 minutes or 60 minutes, and I do the exact same thing. Instead of waking up or struggling or farting or getting cranky about it, I pop my earbuds back in and go back to sleep again, and I've got to tell you, it may sound strange, but that can absolutely be the best part of my night. There is something about allowing yourself pure relaxation right before the alarm that is just satisfying on a whole new level. But it's very important that whatever you do, whatever time of the night you're listening to this or time of the morning, it is important that you relax. So if you're new to the show and prone to late nights lying staring at the ceiling, this may seem strange to you. So give it a chance. Because I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course, you aren't hearing me, except maybe in a dream. Tonight we return to The Coral Ship by H. de Vere Stacpoole. Chapter 8. The Escape. He stood for a moment balancing himself, his eyes sweeping the skyline to southward, which showed neither sail nor stain of smoke. And as he stood, he heard the island calling to him. Hi, hi, hi. You there in the boat. Come back, come back. Hi. Think you to escape us? Ha ha, hi. Fishing, wheeling, calling. Oh, the weariness, the blueness, the waves, the wind, the sun. They are ours and they are yours. Forever, forever, forever. Hi. Through the voices of the gulls came the monotonous tune of the beach across the bright morning sea. The tent flap had got loose again and was beckoning. Come what might, provisions and water must be taken on board, and the clothes he had left on the reef spar recovered. He felt like a man who had just escaped from a haunted house, yet he had to go back. To land again on that terrible spot and leave the boat whilst he hunted for the things was an act requiring real courage, but it had to be done. He got the sculls out, and rowing towards the strand, beached the boat cleverly. There was no danger in leaving her, as the tide was ebbing. The only danger was in delay, for if the water receded too far, he would not be able to get her afloat again until high tide. Jumping out knee-deep, he hauled her nose a little higher on the sand. Then, running like a man pursued, he made for the tent, seized the belt and the pouch of money, made for the heap of provisions, seized a bag of biscuits and some tin stuff, and with his arms folded returned to the boat. It was a nightmare business, for the vague fears of yesterday had become more definite, as though the near chance of escape had given them life. He felt Eves behind him as he ran, sweating as he ran, from the boat to the store of provisions and back to the boat. An empty water breaker from the Rhone lay near the tent. This had to be filled. The spring was amidst the bushes, yet he made his way there, crushing the brushwood under his naked feet, his breath coming in bursts, his lips dry as sandstone. Eves had not caught him yet. As the breaker on his shoulder, he came running back to the boat. He flung it in. The clothes now had to be fetched, the worst part of the business, for it was 50 yards down the beach to the ridge of reef, and the clothes were at the extremity of the reef. But it had to be done, and he ran, sweating yet shivering, worked up to the wildest pitch of excitement, by the sea edge to the shore end of the reef. He was without his boots. He had forgotten that, and the reef was sharp and rough. There were edges like knives that had to be avoided, drive fear as she might. This was the place where Eves had first stood behind him in imagination, and it was here now that the pursuing terror was most acute. At last, bleeding, panting, with shaking hands, he reached the clothes. He put on the boots and with the coat, shirt and trousers under his left arm, came back swiftly along the reef, sprang onto the sand and running, shouting, gesticulating with his free arm, made for the boat. He was shouting at the boat. She was there safe enough and in full sight, yet viewless hands seemed preparing to push her off. She would be gone before he reached her. The island would never let him escape. When he reached her, he brought his open hand bang down on the gunwale, as if to make sure she was really there, flung in the clothes and then tried to push her off. The tide had ebbed more quickly than he had imagined. She was firm on the sand. It was two men's business to float her, and he never would have done it had he been alone. But he was not alone. Fear was with him. The boat gave to his efforts, shifting slightly, then more and more till she moved stem and stern to the lifting waves and was afloat. He tumbled into her and she came broadside on the strand, but the waves were less than 2 feet high, and with one of the sculls he managed to pull her out, and then seizing both sculls he rowed. He was free of the island at last. Sculls and current were sweeping him from it into the wastes of the blue sea. The water, all merry with the breeze, smacked the boat cheerily and flashed away and away and away in the level sunlight, to where the palms were waving, and the foam was breaking and the seagulls calling, come back, you are leaving us, but our voices are following you. Go far as you may, our voices will follow you. Our weariness, the sunlight, the blueness shall be yours forever. You there in the boat alone. Where is Eves? Eves, Eves. Then more far away, the last word, the last echo from the island. Eves, Eves, Eves. Now there was nothing but the passing of the wind, the sound of the sculls and the warbling of the water. There were no waves here. The shallows and the reefs made the sea choppy close to the island. Here there was nothing but a heave of the sea, long lapses of swell, infinitely blue, breeze-strewn and sun-dazzled. Chapter 9. A Star on the Sea. The island had passed away, painted out by distance. The sky above the horizon, paled by the indigo of the sea, lay like a ring of sparkling emerald. To southward, where the emerald passed into the living, burning sapphire of the sky, lay a line of white clouds, swan white and like a flock of flying swans, darkening with their suggestion of snow the blueness of the water, deepening with their remoteness the distance. The warm wind blew steadily, sparkling up the blue, the incredible blue of the sea. The skull blades, immersed half a foot in the water, were tinted with azure. The floating scraps of seaweed were tinted with indigo. A man floating a yard deep would have shone like a form of lazulite. Gaspard had drawn in his sculls. Free of the island now, what use was there in rowing? He had no idea of direction, north, south, east, or west. His only chance, so he told himself, lay in his sighting a ship. He was in the hands of chance, and he did not feel afraid. Not only that, but he felt in his mind a certainty that before long he would be rescued. The relief of his escape from the island may have had something to do with this intuitive optimism, and the fact that he had provisions and water enough to last him for days. Loneliness had vanished. He had left behind her on the island. She and Eve's. It seemed like a bad dream, all that, and Eve's was the worst part of it. He felt neither sorrow nor compunction for what had happened. Why should he? He had not meant to kill, and if he had meant to kill, would he not have been justified? He felt nothing of remorse, nothing of that pity for the dead man which had come to him yesterday, when, standing by the reefs on the eastward of the island, he had looked at the heap of raffle he had solved. He had suffered too much since then to have any sentimental feelings on the matter. Haunted and bedeviled, he had escaped with his reason more by luck than anything else. He dressed himself and then he sat, rocked by the swell, drifting, the sun rising higher towards the zenith, the wind blowing steadily out of the southeast, warm as a woman's breath. Every now and then a flying fish like a silver arrowhead would leave the sea, flash through the air and vanish. Towards noon, a shoal of them, chased by some enemy, broke the water to starboard. One passed right over the boat, soundless in flight, swift, brilliant against the blue, with staring, sightless eyes. A phantom from the deep, pursued by a phantom, definite for a moment and hard to the sight as a jewel, gone like a ghost the moment after, made one again with the blue sea. The wind tempered the heat of the sun. Long strips of seaweed floated past lazily, and a turtle that had been sunning itself basking on the water's surface slipped away and vanished as the boat drew near. A great gull came along, drifting on the wind, passed with the silence of a moving cloud, and dwindled to nothingness in the blue to northward. Nothing in the world of water and sky seemed to move with effort. A profound languor filled it all from the depths below to the heights above, from the little boat whispering and chuckling on the ripples to the distances of the horizon. Distances that showed nothing, told of nothing but summer, vagueness, and azure. 2 hours before sunset, Gaspard, standing up to get a better horizon and shading his eyes with his hand, saw away on the eastern sea line a bright point, burning like a star. Chapter 10. Like a Thief in the Night. It was a sail. He stood with his eyes still shaded, motionless but for the movement of the boat. From away out there, a hand seemed to have reached, clutching at his heart. The star so steadfast and so still held him by its very stillness and steadfastness. There, where the sunlight showed the motionless point of light, were crowded decks, bending spars, snoring sails. Life, motion, a ship breasting her way through the blue sea, heeling to the breeze. All that was there. Here, nothing but a star marking poignantly the vacancy of illimitable distance. The wind had freshened. It was as though the ship had sent the joyous breath of life before her. The breezed-up water smacked the boat merrily, and even as he looked, the star grew, lifting steadily as the mainsails joined the topsails above the sea line. As Gaspard watched, his confidence and assurance left him. The blind trust in chance that had possessed him all day vanished now that chance had shown her hand. At once and vividly his true position stood before him, and the horrible chances of death that lay in it, and so strange a thing as mind. Now and for the first time did the sense of his own wealth and the possession of these 21 big pieces of gold take possession of him. Side by side with the fear of not being rescued, stood the vision of the possibilities that lay in them. Each one weighed as much as 3 20-franc pieces. 603 francs. With that, what might he not do? It was the only big bit of luck that had ever fallen in his way, and it would be doubly bitter to die with his luck in his hands. And still as he watched, the sail grew. The vessel was not nearly so far off as she appeared, for the boat gave a low horizon. For this reason, too, she seemed bigger than she really was. That she was heading straight for the boat he could not doubt, yet he stood torn by the fear that she would miss him, pass him by, not sight him. His imaginative mind saw her passing, saw her fading away, saw himself standing and calling after her and cursing her. So vivid was the obsession that for a moment, as he drew the picture, blazing wrath shot up in his heart towards her captain. Curses rose to his lips and sweat started on his brow. Then he wiped his face with his coat sleeve, and unable to remain in idleness a moment longer, took the sculls and headed the boat for the point from which the vessel was approaching. Useless, the moment his back was turned on the sail, it was gone from his mind as from his sight. He had to keep it in view, and shifting his position with the sculls half drawn in, he sat watching. He had not so good a horizon sitting as standing, yet the sail had sensibly increased in size, even allowing for the altered elevation. With the dip of the sculls, he kept the boat so that he was always facing the approaching vision, and sitting thus, the picture before him resolved itself into 3 components. The after part of the boat, white, clean scoured by spray and burning in the sun with the exception of the space covered by his shadow. The blue of sea and sky, the ship. Seated with the sculls ready to correct the boat when she twisted to the wind and the current, his eyes passed from the boat to the far-off ship, from the ship to the sea and sky. And still she grew, as a child grows in the womb, as an idea in the mind, adding member to member, significance to significance. He could see now the fore-topsail, distinct from the fore-course. She was a square-rigged vessel as to the forepart, but coming as she was, the spread of fore and topsail screened her rig. She had altered too in colour. The frost-white star was now a truncated pyramid of pale but brilliant rose, around which the deep blue heart of the sky paled to emerald by contrast. And still she grew, motionless or seeming not to move, yet becoming more definite, expanding as a bud expands, voiceless and like a vision enveloping in a dream. Moment joined itself to moment, minute to minute. She might now be 10 miles away, or maybe more. Her course would bring her directly to the boat, and she would sight it to a certainty. if she had light. It was his own shadow cast by the oblique rays of the sun on seat and bottom board and thwart that suggested the chilling claws. The sun was little more than an hour from its setting. Would he cut the sea line before the vessel sighted the boat? It was a race between the sun and the ship. He knew quite well that though she was coming apparently dead on to him, the chances were that she might pass him by a considerable distance. And as though the thought had cast a blight on her, for a long time she hung, not seeming to alter in size. Then magically she took distinctness, mystery and beauty left her. In a short half hour she became clearly defined. A small vessel of perhaps 200 tons, at a distance of perhaps 5 miles. She could not be doing more than 8 or 9 knots. Gaspard looked behind him at the sun. It had outraced the ship. There were still diameters between it and the horizon, but the western blue was just beginning to turn, to tinge with vague orange, as though an impalpable mist of gold dust were rising from the sea. But now the ship, as a runner strains when near the goal, seemed straining to reach him. Moment by moment she leapt nearer, and the old stained sails that had lost the vague rose of distance caught now the first touch of gold from the sunset. The eastern sky still held its blue, and against it the ship burned like a ship of gold. And before her prow the water divided like glittering silk cut by a golden sword. Scarcely a mile away she leapt more triumphantly into life. She seemed within hail. Standing up and stripping off his coat, Gaspard waved it, shouting against the wind, delirious, forgetful of distance, forgetful of the sun, and then, just as though a bad wizard had touched her, she began to lose her brilliancy. She had seemed springing towards him with golden arms outspread, triumphant and seeking to save him. And then, just as though indifference had suddenly seized her, she seemed to lose her speed. He turned his head. God, the sun was gone. Just a trace of fire lingering beneath the gold of the sunset, through which, like a dark blue wind, was stealing the light. The vessel from her ship had turned to a phantom lost in the world of violent shadow. With the passing of the sun, the breeze fell away to a gentle breathing of air. Then, in that moment of darkness and indecision, before the stars had taken full possession of the sky, standing up and straining his eyes, he could not see the ship at all. Ah, here she came at last, stealing along in the starlight with sails just filling, and then more clearly to view as 10 million stars lit the sea, turning it to frosted silver. At 4 knots, without a light showing, softly and seeming the very embodiment of treachery and evasion she came. She would pass by some 5 cable lengths to starboard, and Gaspard, seizing the sculls, turned the boat's head to cut her off. As he rowed, he shouted, and had anyone on board heard him, they might have fancied it. So thin and hard was his voice, the crying of a seagull. But from all appearances no one heard him, for not a light showed. Now she bulked up enormous, a great trapezium of ebony cutting the silver sky. He ceased rowing, shouted again, and paused to listen. So close was she that he could hear the wash of the water at her forefoot, the creaking of blocks and the slatting of the scarcely filled sails. Scarcely a cable length away, and making to pass him by half that distance she came, black as ebony, a barkentine, silent as a phantom, stealthy as a thief. Then, as he hailed her again with a last despairing cry, she burst into voice. Chapter 11. Captain Sagesse. A lantern shot its light over the port quarter. A voice hailed him from the deck. Hi-yi-ow, shrill as a bird, and at the cry like a shaken beehive, the forecastle broke into life. The decks in a moment were a swarm, chattering like a tree full of monkeys. Another lantern showed over the port bow, and above the lantern, a face black as the face of a devil with glittering eyeballs and white teeth grinned down on the boat below. Next moment, something struck Gaspard across the chest. It was a rope. Seizing it, he held on, and the little boat came up grinding against the great washing wall of the vessel, carried with her on the slow way and right beneath the broad channel of the foremast. He seized the rope's end to the forward seat, caught up the belt with a pouch of gold, and fastened it to his waist. Then, reaching up, he caught hold of a channel plate, and with the help of another rope flung by the chattering crowd above, swung himself onto the channel. Next moment, he was on deck. The starlight lit the decks dimly fore and aft. He was surrounded with the crew swarming and chattering. A man in a Panama hat who had helped him over the side, and who, disregarding him, was now shouting directions in shrill French to a man who had slipped down into the boat, seemed the only white man on board. Having finished his directions, he turned, kicked a man who stood in his way, caught up a lantern, and, coming up to Gaspard, held the light to him as if he were a work of art he wished to examine. French? Asked the man in the Panama, speaking in that language, and fixing Gaspard with a pair of beady, unwinking black eyes. His face, lit up by the lantern light, was round, good-tempered looking, the face of a bon bourgeois. Yet the eyes chilled Gaspard for a moment ere he replied. Yes, French. Shipwrecked and floating about in that cursed boat until you nearly ran me down. What ship? The Rhone of the Compagnie Transatlantique. The Rhone. I have seen her in Havana Harbor. Is she lost then? Yes. Ripped her bottom out on a reef and gone with all on board. You are the only one saved? Yes. Boufre, said the other, betraying his Provence in the word. A Moko too. So was I till I became a man of my own. Well, I have saved you, and I take the boat. I am Captain Sagesse, and this is my bark, La Belle Arlésienne. He seized Gaspard by the coat label as he brought the words out with emphasis. The boat is mine, you understand? Oh, the boat she's yours, and welcome. She's worth 500 francs, and a brush full of white paint will take the Rhone's name off her. I found you on a raft. No, on a hen coop. No, on a spar. He slipped his arm through Gaspard's and was leading him off to the deck house on the poop. You were floating on a spar. Here is the deck house. Come in. He opened the deck house door, disclosing a cabin comfortably yet roughly furnished. A table stood in the middle. Over the table hung a swinging lamp. Two doors opening aft gave entrance to the captain and the mate's cabins. Tiny holes not much bigger than dog kennels. The captain flung his Panama on the table, and Gaspard took a seat and looked at his companion, who was now opening a locker and fetching out a bottle of rum and some glasses, and a basket of ship biscuits. This round-faced and contented-looking personage had, in the first moment of their acquaintance, invented and asked him to assist in a microscopic felony. He placed his hand on the bag of gold at his side as, leaning on the table, he replied, But see here, that boat doesn't belong to the Rhone at all. The man in the Panama had placed the things on the table. He turned. But you said. Yes, But you have not heard all. I was wrecked from the Rhone right enough on a spar too, away on an island down there. Then the boat came floating along. She has no name on her that I have seen. I got into her and rowed away. That is all. Outre, said Sagesse, pouring out 2 glasses of rum, whilst Gaspard took a biscuit. The little man seemed almost disappointed. One might have fancied that he regretted the lost chance of doing the Compagnie Transatlantique out of a boat. Then he took a Martinique cigar from his pocket, lit it, and with his elbows on the table began to talk and ask questions. He asked questions without waiting for an answer. Nay, he sometimes answered them himself as, "The Rhone, I've seen her in Havana Harbour. What tonnage was she? Oh, I know, 7,000. She and the Roxelane were sister ships. The Roxelane called regularly at Saint Pierre. Oh yes, I ought to know her, Martinique bred as I am. Not born, mind you. No, I was born at Arles. But I've spent 30 years in these seas. One can make money in these seas, but one can never forget the old land. And you were born at Montpellier, you say? 'Tis the same thing, and all Provençals are brothers. Think you, if I picked up a Dutchlander or an English, or even a Pontonaise, he would be giving him rum in my cabin?" Then, mellowed by the rum, and in the presence of another Provençal, he leaned his elbows further on the table, and continued talking and asking questions without seeming to hear the answers. Chapter 12. Rum. He had done big things, had Captain Sagesse, since the day 30 years and more ago, when deserting from a French ship he had taken up his abode at Saint Pierre. Beginning at the very bottom, he had worked his way up to comparative affluence, and whilst plying Gaspard with questions, he interpolated fragments of his own history. Captain Sagesse was the only subject of very deep interest to Captain Sagesse. Had he been going to his own execution, he would have cast fragments of his history to the crowds. He was a walking autobiography, and he had been closed for 3 weeks. He had no one to open himself to. He told of how he worked the vessel entirely with the Barbadians, and when he had exhausted his slight interest in Gaspard and his history, he returned to himself, talking as though Gaspard was an old friend just stepped aboard, the Freemasonry of the South and a common birthplace giving him the familiarity of long acquaintanceship. There was scarcely a disreputable transaction in which a ship's keel could find a place, but it seemed that Captain Sagesse and his bark, the Belle Arlésienne, had been in it. Gun running in the Spanish-American War, smuggling and worse. He owned the vessel, he owned property in Martinique, and very questionable property in Saint Pierre. And inspired now by rum and what seemed at first blush a charming and natural naivete, he told about himself and his doings, his possessions and aspirations with characteristic force and freedom. Gaspard, at first half drowsy with weariness, listened like a person in a dream to the chatter of the other. Then, the rum beginning to take effect upon him, he found himself laughing at things which might have made him frown if he listened in strict sobriety. He was sinner enough, but in his small way in life he had dealt straightly with his fellows. He had at all events no feeling for a scoundrel, and Captain Sagesse was scoundrel enough, heaven knows, to judge by his conversation. He had got the better of governments, men and women. He gave neither names nor dates nor places, talking in his loose way with nothing more definite than, it was an islet. It might have been 15 miles south or 55 miles north of Rum Cay, but that doesn't matter. Or Honorine, that might have been her name, but it wasn't. Anyhow, I'll tell you the trick she served Pierre Sagesse, and then I'll tell you the trick he served her. All at once the brain of Gaspard, drowsed by the events of the day, cleared. Perception became acute, sensation beatified, 2 glasses of strong rum and the Martinique bout, which the captain had given him, had opened for him the door of the brandy paradise. The deckhouse of La Belle Alessienne seemed palatial. Sagesse, the greatest of men, and he, Gaspard Cadillac, the equal of Sagesse. He held out his glass for more rum. And mark you, said Sagesse as he poured it out, I got my hold on her in that way because, mon Dieu, I remember those 2 words she said by that night to the mates of the Bayonnaise. They thought I was drunk, but I've never been drunk in my life, and I never forget. Nor I, said Gaspard. Never been drunk and never forget. The recollection of Anisette and Eves came up in his mind. He thumped the table with his fist. I have served my man out. No, I never forget. Now you listen. But Sagesse was off on another tack. Money business this time. And Gaspard, rocking unsteadily in his seat with his eyes injected, the cigar in the corner of his mouth and his fists clenched on the table before him, sat hearing nothing. Glorified in the hideous upset of alcohol, filled with the splendor of his own importance, and tormented on his throne by something, he knew not what, but which took the form of Eves. It was the woman of Marseille still working like a demon at his heart, and brought into full life by the drink. The feeling that another man had done him out, that another man had been preferred to him, that another man was a better animal, even though that man was dead. Alcohol told him he was glorious, supreme, a man amongst men. Anisette, like a pale, sneering ghost, said, Shaw, where's Eves? You are nothing to a woman. And it was worth $7,000 American gold coins, Sagesse was saying in the course of his yarn, when Gaspard, whipping the belt and pouch from his waist, brought them down on the table with a bang so that the gold coins rolled out. Look at that, cried Gaspard. What you say? Wasn't that worth the thrust of a knife? The coins danced before him as he sat rocking in his seat. An abstemious man as a rule, the wariness and the strong old rum had done their work. Sagesse stopped short in his story, stared at the belt and the gold, and then at the man before him. Sagesse, though he chatted of his own doings, never by any chance gave a man a handle to use against him. His tales were as vague, all save the villainy of them, as clouds. His one weakness was talking, and he knew it, and he guarded against it. The villainies he boasted of were all apocryphal. Based they were on black deeds, just as clouds are based on mountains. The scoundrel in him liked to boast, but to bring Sagesse to book on one of his stories would be like attempting to bring a bird to earth by grasping at its shadow on the ground. Men had tried to blackmail this raconteur on the strength of his statements, to bring the vulture to earth by catching at his shadow, only to find themselves in the vulture's clutch, blackmailed themselves most cruelly. And he never let go as long as his clutch held, and there was a feather on the victim. But though he chattered fables, he knew when to be silent in the face of facts. He was silent now. He laughed, but said nothing for a moment, while Gaspard, gathering the coins together in a heap, reiterated his question. What do you say? Isn't that worth the thrust of a knife? Given in fair fight, mind you, man to man, and the better man wins. Sagesse held out his hand, took a coin, examined it, and handed it back. Bon Dieu, yes. So you killed him. But where did he get these things from? They are not coins of today. Had he then been robbing a museum? Gaspard nodded with drunk gravity. That's it. You've hit it. He robbed someone of them and wouldn't share. It was over there on the island. Aha, said Sagesse. So you killed him on the island, Vere? But you are a man after my own heart. The island. And the name of the man you said was Eves? Gaspard, exhausted, falling into the third stage of intoxication, was leaning now over the table. His eyelids drooping, the cigar end, no longer alight, held loosely in his nerveless fingers. Eves? And what rating was he? Stoker. So. But he had another name. He was not only called Eves. What you say? Asked Gaspard, rousing slightly. Sagesse repeated his question, but the man at the table did not seem to comprehend. Then, stricken with sleep, he sank completely forward, his head resting right cheek down on the table, his right hand on the pouch containing the money. Sagesse looked at him for a moment contemplatively. Then he went to the door and cried, "Jules!" A shuffling sound came along the deck, and a big man, barefooted and bare-breasted, with his wool all tied up in little knots, made his appearance at the door. Sagesse pointed to the man at the table, and Jules, with a broad grin, but without a word, entered and took the dreamer by the shoulders. Sagesse took him by the feet, and between them they carried him to the starboard dock hall, which did duty for a mate's cabin when a mate was on board. Here they put him in the bunk. Sagesse placed the belt and the pouch of money in the bunk beside him. Then they closed the door on him and left him to his slumbers. When Sagesse found himself alone, he took a chart from a locker, spread it on the table, and pored over it. Gaspard had told him he had only been drifting since morning. If this was so, if the man were not lying, and if indeed he had left an island that morning, then the only island he possibly could have left was here marked on the chart. A tiny island reef beset to north and south and east, 80 miles or so southeast of Turk's Island. Sagesse knew the Caribbean Sea, and the Atlantic that includes the Bahamas as well, almost as he knew the heart of the lower order of mankind. He knew from his own knowledge, and leaving the chart aside, that there was only one islet about here from which a boat could drift or be rowed in the course of a day, to the point where it picked up his new acquaintance. He knew the island by sight too. The clump of 7 palm trees, this white sandy beach, and the murderous reefs. He had seen it through the glass several times in the past years. He had counted the palms, 7 of them. He never forgot anything. That was partly why, from a foremast hand in the French mercantile marine, he had risen to wealth and eminence of a sort. He fetched a pen and inkhorn from the locker and made just over the islet to the form of a tiny cross. Then he put the chart, pen, and ink back in their places and came on deck. The moon had risen, still a crescent but strong enough to flood the sea with light. Jules had relieved the man at the wheel and stood a dusky ghost before the yellow binnacle light. The wind still held and had even strengthened a little, and in the silence of the night, the click of the rudder chain, the wash of the water at the bow, and the occasional groan of hemp rope and block could be heard. The barkentine seemed talking to herself in an undertone. Old and weary of the sea, dressed in canvas, patched and stained and ill-fitting, barnacled and streaming southern weeds from her copper, she went her way across the moonlit waters, steering now to make passage between Haiti and Puerto Rico, a hag of the ocean groping away from port to port, now on honest business, now on contraband, from Yucatan to Port of Spain. Chapter 13. La Belle à la Sienne. At about 6 o'clock the next morning, Gaspard awoke from sleep, half stifled by the close air of the little cabin where Sogese had placed him. The taste of the rum was still in his mouth, and at a stroke and almost at the return of consciousness, the doings of the past night rose before him. Up to a certain point. He remembered the conversation of Sogese. He remembered taking the belt from his waist and flinging it in the pouch of money on the table. But beyond that point, he remembered nothing. He put his hand to his waist. Belt and bag were gone. He put his legs out of the bunk and was just in the act of getting on his feet when his hand rested on something hard. It was the pouch. It had not been tampered with. He could tell that by the feel. But to make sure, he opened it and counted the gold pieces by the dim light which shone through the scuttle overhead. Yes, the 21 pieces of gold were there. Solid, bright and hard. He put the belt around his waist, and buttoning his coat over the pouch, came on deck. La Belle Alessienne, close-hauled under all sail, was making a full 8 knots, steering south-southeast with the coast of Haiti alone on the southern horizon. She had altered her course in the night, and she lay now with the shoals and reefs south of Turk's Island on her port quarter. But nothing of them showed, for the sea over that way under the newborn sun lay like a blazing gem, a sheet of corrugated crystal, each of whose million facets was a mirror. Then round from there to where the bowsprit was poking at the sky above the sea line went the sea, without sail or sign of life deepening in blueness to where far off Haitian coast lay, hyacinth-coloured in the morning. Gaspard looked around him. He could see no sign of Sogese. A man dressed in a pair of canvas trousers held by a single suspender stood at the wheel. Several more were grouped around the forecastle head engaged on some business, and a thin streak of smoke from the caboose told of breakfast in progress. From where he stood, the deck stretched away unencumbered by cargo, and barred by the shadows of the standing rigging. They had taken the boat on board, and she was lying bottom up on the deck forward of the mainmast. Despite her age, despite the deck so yellow-stained by time that plank and dowel were of the same colour and indistinguishable, despite the sails all cut and patched, the old barkentine had still a look of buoyancy and life caught from the brave morning light and the flooding azure of sea and sky. The smell of tar and bilge and rope, the groan of rubber and creak of mast, brought up for Gaspard the vision of the Tamalpais and his early youth. No other sensation is at all like the feeling of a sailing ship beneath one's feet. The steamer is a dead weight driven by an alien force. Its progression is a continual insult to the wind and the sea. But the sailing ship is one with the sea and the wind. Her motion is fluent, fresh, and part of the eternal movement of nature. As Gaspard stood with his eyes fixed on the distant Haitian coast, Sogese came out of the deckhouse and gave him a good morning. The captain had a telescope in his hand, and ranging himself beside Gaspard, he began to examine the coastline attentively through the glass. Not a word did he say of the proceedings of the past night. He stood picking out the points and headlands of the coast, remarking on them now and then throwing in some piece of reminiscence as, over there, you can just see that bluish spot. It goes in deep, the land there. That's where a big English ship went on the rocks. The Seven in the storm of '82. I helped in the salving. Ma foi, I've never seen such a big ship with her back so broken. She was opened out like a bandbox. She was filled with millinery too. New York fashions for Jamaica. The rocks were dressed in chiffon. It was like the wreck of the Bon Marché, and the ladies came down to help. You can fancy. Or, that point? You can just see it with the eye to the eastward of the blue spot. Over there. They hanged the last of the pirates, Fremantle. What does he know? What did I say last night? I remember flinging that money on the table. I remember saying something about Eve's, but what? Did I say much? Did I say little? And the money? He must have picked it up and put it in the pouch, and put the pouch and belt beside me as I lay in the bunk. Hog that I was. Mon Dieu, what did I say? These thoughts were running through Gaspar's mind as he stood watching his companion and listening to his remarks almost without comprehending them. But Sagase, whatever he knew, showed nothing of his knowledge. He chatted familiarly and easy, and when breakfast was brought aft by Jules, they sat down to it. And over the steaming coffee and fried bacon and bananas, the captain continued his easygoing discourse, chatting on everything and nothing, but always with interest. The black godly edge had gone off his conversation. It was only at night it appeared wetted by alcohol, for Sagase was a methodical drinker, never glancing at the bottle till the absinthe hour. Gaspar during the meal made an offer of work, but Sagase would not hear of it. You are a brother Provençal. Well, I've picked you up floating about on the sea, and that's all about it. I've more than enough hands to work the ship, and your food, what does it cost? Besides, we can settle up at Saint-Pierre. Saint-Pierre, Martinique. Yes, that is my port. You have never been there? Ah, mon Dieu, then you have never seen life. You will see it at Saint-Pierre, where men know how to laugh, and love is as cheap as bananas. Well, I will be able to pay you, said Gaspard. That is to say, if I can ever pay you for all you have done for me. Sagase laughed. His face, ordinarily pleasant except for a certain fixity of the eyes, lost its pleasantness in some strange way when he laughed. Clean-shaved except for a rather heavy and drooping moustache, fat and weather-tanned, in white cap and apron, save for his bronzing, he would have made an ideal chef. A concoctor of sauces and entremets, fat with the steam of his kitchen. But when he laughed, he showed his teeth, and just that one touch destroyed his bonhomie. For his laughter did not extend above his mouth, and laughter is inhuman when the eyes do not correct the teeth. All day they kept the Haitian coast on the distant horizon. The water had been blue off the island, but to Gaspard, as he hung over the side, it seemed that this water was even bluer. It was. The Caribbean, that great lake of burning indigo, was sending its color to meet them. The foam flakes from the forefoot of the Belle Océan swept past like marble shavings cast on slabs of lapis lazuli, and violets would have seemed pale and faded held against the background of the sea to southward. And that's where I'm going to leave it for tonight. Story's getting rather interesting and rather exciting, so if you'd like to pick up where I'm leaving off, because I don't think I'm going to carry on with this one, you can find it on Project Gutenberg at the link in the show notes. Quick heads up, there's a little bit of slightly uncomfortable racial stuff that I sort of skimmed over, so don't be too surprised if you find it when you're going through. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes are released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get your new episodes whenever they come out. A reminder that the music for tonight is Sweet Nights and Friends by Kumiko. Check out more of their work on their website, which you'll find linked in the show notes. Good night, and sweet dreams.